Hi class, for this week we're going to look into the relationship between Mexico and the US in the beginning of the 1900s. So we're going to analyze the relationship between the United States in terms of push and pull factors and how it affects both countries. 3 decades, and at the beginning of the 20th century, the Southwest was increasingly influenced by railroad networks, large-scale mining, and commercial farming based on mass markets. When Chinese migrants arrived as early as 1790s, the laws were harsh against them. Chinese migrants were prohibited by law in 1970 from obtaining U.S. citizenship. Then Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. Indirectly, the Chinese Exclusion Act gave the opportunity for Mexicanos to find work in the Southwest. The Reclamation Act of 1902 opened up much of the Southwest for the agribusiness. This was a time of prosperity for many Mexicanos who came to work in the agribusiness, especially in the sugar beet throughout California and Colorado. By 1907, all these anti-Chinese exclusion acts ended up opening up the doors for Mexicanos to work also in the railroad systems. There was so much demand for labor that during this time agribusiness began paying agents to recruit farm workers. Mexicanos were also recruited to work in the mines, for example, the Western Federation of Miners and the American Federation of Labor in the early 1900s opened up the doors for Mexicans to work in the mines. So the Mexican Revolution was really violent. From 1910 to 1920, there were about 1 million Mexicanos who entered the U.S. escaping the war. However, the Mexican Revolution created tensions at the border. There were many groups like the sediciosos who started to attack Anglo businesses. One of the most controversial plots is the Plan de San Diego. It was a revolutionary manifesto supposedly written and signed in South Texas in the town of San Diego. So the plan provided for forming a liberating army of races and peoples to be made up of Mexicanos, African Americans, and Japanese to free the states of Texas, California, New Mexico, to retake back the Southwest from the Americans. By the time the Mexicanos wants to act on the Plan of San Diego, you have the Texas Rangers who were retaliating against most of these Mexicanos. They acted as vigilantes. During the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Mexicanos were subject to torture, flogging, lynching, shootings, and other mob violence. But the war at the border kind of escalated when Woodrow Wilson became involved in the Mexican Revolution and Pancho Villa felt betrayed. And this is the beginning of Pancho Villa actually going into the US and attacking Americans. There was a lot of tension at this time. You have World War One and the Germans who wanted to also work with the Mexicans. And they sent that infamous Zimmerman telegram where the Germans promised Mexicanos, if you help us out to fight against the US, we can give you back the Southwest. So after World War One, there was so much hatred towards the Mexican American communities. By the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan had become very active in the southwestern mining camps, viciously killing a lot of Mexicanos. Even though the Jim Crow didn't really apply to the Mexicanos because the Mexicanos were considered white, there was a lot of segregations on the Mexicanos. But the Mexicanos organized themselves with a group called Mutualistas, and they provided services to Mexicanos who were denied, like, let's say, education or healthcare services. By the time the US is entering into an economic crisis, Mexicanos become a scapegoat for the lack of jobs. This is the time where a lot of members of the Congress wants to pass laws to restrict Mexican immigration. 1920s Congress petitioned to make unlawful entry a punishable offense. There's also the bill by John C. Boggs in 1926 who wanted to include Mexico in the quota system. By 1924, we have the Border Patrol, and this is actually a picture at San Isidro entry here in the border between San Diego and Tijuana. By 1930, the situation for Mexicans and Mexican Americans worsened with the stock market crash. Then by 1930s, you have President Hoover, who was really anti-Mexican, and he was really happy with not letting Mexicanos in the US. So President Hoover came up with the program of American jobs for real Americans. In Detroit, for example, the automakers fired many of their Hispanic workers. So according to the official United States INS records, during the Great Depression, an estimated 400,000 to a million Mexicans and Mexican Americans left the US back to Mexico.